Hi everyone, it's Tyron Pretorius here from the workflowpro.com, and today I'm going to walk you through how to integrate the Dropbox, Marketo, Rebrandly and Airtable APIs within Zapier so that you can upload a piece of content straight from Dropbox to Marketo, get a Rebrandly shortened URL, upload a new row to Airtable, and finally create a performance tracking program in Marketo for that piece of content. Just a quick note, this video is intended as a supplement to the blog post that is already live on the workflowpro.com. I'll post a link to this blog post in the video description, along with a link to the GitHub repository, which contains all the Python code that's used within these Zapier steps. So if you want a bit more information as to what the code in each of these steps is doing, take a look at the blog post because I go in depth and I describe what each of these pieces of code is doing in here. As a bit of background, if you're a marketing operations lead like myself and you're working with a content marketing team that is churning out content and it's taking you a lot of time each week to handle all the submissions, upload the content to Marketo, get Rebrandly shortened URLs, upload new rows to Airtable for the content, and finally creating corresponding Marketo programs to track how that content is performing, this is obviously going to take a lot of your time. And this is something I was experiencing, and that is exactly why I built this app. So the first step of the process is the product marketing manager, who I'm going to call a PMM moving forward. They'll fill out information about the piece of content. So what is the content type? What's its name? The Rebrandly /tag, which I'll get to in a moment. The Dropbox path for the piece of content, and the Resource Center post link. Here at Telnex, which is the company I work for, we host each piece of content within its own dedicated Resource Center page where anyone browsing the internet can come to find that piece of content. Sometimes if the piece of content is gated, a person will need to fill out a form first before they can access it. So once the product marketing manager fills out the Google form, that's going to populate a new row in the corresponding Google Sheet containing all that information. This in turn is going to trigger the first step of our Zap, which you can see here is get submission from Google Form, and we tell it that this is the spreadsheet we're working with, and this is the tab that all the Google Form responses are going to be populated into. Once the Zap has been triggered, we can then access all the information that was specified by the PMM, and one of those pieces of information is the Dropbox path for the piece of content. We're going to take this Dropbox path and we're going to make a request to the Dropbox API, and it in turn is going to return a temporary link that we can use to upload the file straight from Dropbox to the Marketo Design Studio. Before we do that though, we need a Marketo access token to allow us to use the Marketo REST API. Be wary that the Marketo access token only lasts for an hour, so every time you run your Zap you need to pull it fresh every time just to make sure that it won't expire as your Zap is running down through subsequent steps. Now that we've got the Marketo access token and the Dropbox path, we're going to pull those two pieces of information in here. You can see we pull in the Dropbox path from step 2, we pull in the token from step 3, and we pull in some information that the product marketing manager specified just to help us with naming it in the Design Studio. Now we're going to make a request to Marketo REST API to upload that piece of content to Dropbox. To upload that piece of content to the Marketo Design Studio. So now that piece of content has been uploaded, it's going to return a URL of that piece of content that is now hosted in the Marketo Design Studio. At Telnex, we publicize each release of a piece of content on social media platforms like Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And on LinkedIn, for example, when you share a URL, it shares the entire URL, which can sometimes, it'll appear to your customers, and sometimes these URLs can be quite ugly if you're using query string parameters. So here at Telnex, we use Rebrandly, which is a URL shortener. So for example, it'll give you your company domain, and then after the /, everything here you can specify yourself for each link. And this is called the Rebrandly /tag. When someone clicks on this piece of link, it'll redirect to your original destination. So when you're using social media platforms like LinkedIn, you can specify the pretty, aesthetically pleasing Rebrandly URL, and it will redirect to your original destination. So here in step 5, we're going to take that Marketo URL and the Rebrandly /tag, which the product marketing manager specified in the Google form, and we're going to get a Rebrandly shortened URL. And you can see that here in the output. And we use something called Airtable to host all the pieces of content, so it's easy for people in the sales team or in the rest of the marketing team to find all the pieces of content we have available so they can share them with customers or use them for their own information. You can see it's set up quite similar to Google Sheets, where you've got a tab for each category, and for example, final marketing assets, we've got a tab for ebooks, fact sheets, infographics, videos, etc. So when we have a new piece of content, we want to find the category that it relates to, and we want to upload a new row for that piece of content containing information about it, as well as the Rebrandly shortened URL. This is exactly what happens in step 6. We're going to make a request to the Airtable API, and we're going to populate a new row with the Rebrandly URL, as well as some other information about the piece of content. And then it returns a confirmation message just to say that everything was successful. And this is now when we move back into Marketo. So just to summarize these steps, we took a piece of content straight from Dropbox, we uploaded it to the Marketo Design Studio, we then got a Rebrandly shortened URL for it, and we uploaded a new row to Airtable so that people in the rest of the marketing team or in the sales team can find that piece of content. Now we want to create a performance tracking program in Marketo so that we can see how many visits this piece of content is getting and how many downloads it's getting. The first step of that process is it's to find the folder that this new Marketo program will be contained within. So here in Marketo, we've got a folder for each piece of content that we have. For example, case studies, ebooks, fact sheets, and guides. And this first step is tasked with finding the most recent folder for that content type. So in this example of ebooks, the most recent folder will be 2020 ebooks. And that's what this step is going to do. It's going to return the folder ID of that most recent folder, and we're going to specify that in step 8, and step 8 is then tasked with finding the most recently created Marketo program within that folder. And why are we looking for the most recently created program? Well, it's most likely that the most recently created program within this folder, it's going to be the most up to date, and when we clone it, it's going to be the most likely to be correct. So there's the least likely chance of someone needing to make manual updates to it after the Zap is run. So we specify the folder we're searching within, and then step 8 is going to return the program ID of the most recently created Marketo program within this folder. So in this example, it would return the program ID for 2020-08, your guide to choosing the right voice API. And now we want to clone that most recently created program, so we're going to pull in that ID from step 8 here, and we're going to pull in some other information, which we're just going to use for updating the name of the program, as well as its description. Then the output of this step is going to be the program ID of the newly created Marketo program. And in this program, we use local tokens within each of these smart campaigns. These smart campaigns down here are used for performance tracking to see how many visits the piece of content is getting, how many downloads it's getting, and the influence this piece of content is having on contact sales form fills or signing up for our portal. One of the pieces of information that we specify in these local program tokens are the UTM parameters that we use within PDF content. So for this ebook, The Better Twilio Alternative, And actually, in any PDF content we have a Telnext, whether it's an ebook, a fact sheet, a guide, or a white paper, any link within the piece of content that links back to telnext.com, we append it with query string parameters. So we know that if anyone is visiting telnext.com and the query string contains the Twilio alternative ebook, we know that the person visited our website from this ebook. So in step 10, we want to pull in the UTM parameters that we're using for this particular piece of content. And where do we go to get that? Well, we've got a UTM builder content sheet, and the very last row within this sheet will contain the query string parameters for the most recently updated piece of content. In step 10, we're just going to specify the sheet we're looking for. We're going to specify some information about the lookup column, and we're going to search from the bottom up because we're looking for the most recently uploaded piece of content, which is going to be the bottom row in the Google Sheet. And then it's going to return all the information within that row. And in particular, what we're looking for from this are the query string parameters. Once we have the query string parameters, and we know the names of the local program tokens we want to update, then we're going to take those query string parameters as well as some other information we want to put into the tokens, and we're going to loop through all the tokens one by one and populate them with this input information. As I showed you before, some of the content we have is gated. So what happens here is a person visits our site, they fill out the form, and then they get an email which gives them a link to access a piece of content. So in the content program here in Marketo, we've got a smart campaign that tracks when someone fills out that form. And when they do, this email gets sent to that person, allowing them to download the piece of content. One thing to note is that when you clone the program over, this email retains the name that it had in the this email contains a name that it had in the previous program. So when you clone it, it's going to have the incorrect name for the first time you view it. So that's why step 12 is going to get the email ID of this email within the program. And then step 13 is going to take that email ID and it's going to rename that email so that it's relevant for the current program. And then before I dive into the two final steps of the Zap, I'll just show you why these final two steps are needed. So in a lot of these smart campaigns, in the smart lists and the flows, I use the UTM parameters for that piece of content. And when I'm updating these smart lists or flows manually, it's just easy for me to copy and paste the query string parameters from the description of the smart campaign. So that's why in step 14, I specify the program ID and I make a request to Marketo REST API endpoint to get all the smart campaign IDs within this program. It then returns all the IDs. You can obviously see they'll need to be parsed out in your Python code. And then finally in step 15, we parse out those IDs, and then we make a request to update the description of each of these smart campaigns with the query string parameters. So now when I go back and I'm trying to update all these smart campaigns manually, I can just copy and paste the query string and use it in the smart lists or the flows of my smart campaigns. So that is how you can upload a piece of content from Dropbox to Marketo, get the Rebrandly shortened URL, upload that new piece of content to Airtable, and finally create a Marketo performance tracking program for that piece of content. I hope you found this video useful. If you have any questions on this Zap or any of the individual pieces of code here within GitHub, please feel free to comment on the video, or if you want, you can comment here at the bottom of the blog post, and I'll be very happy to help you guys out. If you find this content interesting and you want to see some more of it, I'll have more videos coming up on my channel, so feel free to have a look around there, see if anything catches your eye. And then similarly, on theworkflowpro.com, I've got a few blog posts up there now that any marketing operations manager or anyone who's interested in automation, Zapier, scripts, you could find a lot of these things interesting, and they might also save you time in your day-to-day. So have a nose around theworkflowpro.com and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you later.